I never believed in curses, haunted objects, or animals behaving in unnatural ways. That changed the day I brought home Whisper. She was a beautiful black cat with deep golden eyes, a stray I had found outside my apartment, hiding beneath a car during a storm. Her fur was sleek, her movements almost too graceful, and there was something oddly intelligent about the way she stared at me. I should have left her there. The moment I brought her inside, my other pets reacted strangely. My dog, Bruno, a usually friendly golden retriever, refused to enter my room. He whined at the doorway, tail tucked between his legs, backing away whenever Whisper so much as glanced at him. My other cat, Luna, arched her back and hissed, something she had never done before. I laughed it off, thinking it was just animals being animals, but looking back, I should have listened to them. That first night, Whisper was different. Unlike most cats, she didn't explore or hide. She sat in the corner of my room, watching me, just staring. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her perched on my nightstand, golden eyes fixed on my face. No blinking, no movement, just staring. I tried to brush it off, but the dreams started soon after. Dark corridors, twisting shapes, the feeling of being watched, of something pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. A voice whispering my name, so close to my ear it made my skin crawl. The worst part, whenever I woke up, Whisper was right there. One night, I jolted awake, sweating, heart pounding. The room was dark, but I felt something heavy on my chest. I gasped, looking down. Whisper was sitting there, her golden eyes wide and gleaming. Her mouth was slightly open, and for a split second, I thought I saw teeth too sharp for a cat. She let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a purr. Something else. Something. Wrong. I shoved her off, heart racing. She landed without a sound and slinked into the shadows. I could still feel the weight on my chest, a lingering pressure that refused to fade. The next morning, I found something disturbing. My bedroom door was locked. From the inside. I never locked my door at night. My window, which had been shut, was slightly open. And in the corner of my room where Whisper had sat the night before were deep claw marks. Not cat-sized. Too long. Too deep. Still, I ignored it. Maybe I did it in my sleep. Maybe I locked the door and forgot. But then the voices started. At first, they were just whispers in the middle of the night, faint, unintelligible murmurs I thought were just my imagination. But soon they grew louder, more distinct. I heard my name, soft but insistent, and always, Whisper was there, watching, waiting, and then things got worse. The nights became unbearable. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something watching me. I knew it was Whisper. No matter how much I tried to ignore the feeling, it pressed against me like an unseen weight. I started leaving the lights on, hoping it would keep the unease at bay, but it didn't help. Whisper had become more erratic. She would vanish for hours, hiding in places I couldn't find, only to reappear in the most unsettling ways, perched on top of my dresser, sitting in the bathtub, or worst of all, at the foot of my bed, staring. Her golden eyes seemed to glow even when there was no light. Then came the scratching. It started faint, just a soft rustling sound at night. I thought it was Luna at first, but she had taken to sleeping in the living room, refusing to come near my bedroom. Bruno still wouldn't step past the threshold. That should have been a sign. One night I woke up to a long, slow scratch against my wooden floor. My breath caught in my throat. My room was pitch dark, but I could hear it. A deliberate, drawn-out scraping sound. I reached for my phone, flicking on the flashlight. Whisper was crouched in the corner, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her golden eyes reflecting the light like twin burning coals. Her claws were digging into the floor, carving deep, jagged lines. She wasn't playing. She wasn't stretching. She was carving something. My hands trembled as I pointed the light at the floor. It wasn't random scratches. It was a shape, a circle, symbols, strange, intricate marks that looked almost like letters but twisted, wrong. Something cold spread through my chest. I scrambled out of bed, my breath shallow. Whisper? My voice cracked. She didn't move, just watched. Then in a slow, deliberate motion, she lifted one paw and dragged a claw across the wooden floor again, completing the final line of the circle. The light flickered, and then for the first time I heard it. A whisper, not a cat's purr, not a rustle of movement, a voice. Low. Distorted. Coming from inside my room. I spun around, heart hammering. No one was there, but the air felt thick, heavy, like something unseen was pressing against me. I turned back to Whisper, but she was gone. Just gone. The whispering continued, soft, relentless, skittering across my walls like unseen fingers. My body was frozen, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped in that moment, in that suffocating silence. Then the lights went out. A gust of cold air rushed through my room, sending my curtains billowing. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached for my phone again, fumbling with shaking hands. I turned on the flashlight. Whisper was back. But she wasn't alone. A shadow loomed behind her, something tall, thin, its limbs impossibly long, its fingers curling around the edges of my bookshelf. No features, just darkness, except for two sunken, burning eyes. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. And then Whisper spoke. Not a meow, not a growl, a voice, low, hollow. Wrong, you should not have brought me here. The lights flickered back on. The shadow was gone. The whispering stopped. Whisper sat in the same spot, looking up at me like nothing had happened. But I couldn't unhear it, that voice, that thing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Because now I knew the truth. Whisper wasn't just a cat, and whatever she had brought into my home wasn't leaving. I barely made it through the next day. Every sound in my apartment felt off. The creaking of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. It all felt too loud, like the walls were breathing, like something unseen was listening, watching. I tried to pretend it was just my imagination, that the night before had been some horrible dream, but every time I glanced at Whisper, that burning stare reminded me otherwise. She wasn't a normal cat, and now I was certain I wasn't alone. That evening, I decided to stay at a friend's place. My best friend, Jake, lived just a few blocks away. He laughed when I told him I was spooked by my own cat, but he let me crash on his couch anyway. You seriously think she talked to you? He smirked as he handed me a beer. I didn't know what to say. If I admitted the full truth, the shadow, the whispering, the unnatural carvings, I knew he'd think I'd lost my mind, so I just nodded. She's different, I muttered. Ever since I brought her home, weird things have been happening. My pets won't come near her. I keep waking up in the middle of the night, and it feels like something is in my room. Jake's smirk faded slightly. Okay, that's creepy. I nodded. I just need a break. One night without her watching me. He clinked his beer against mine. You can stay as long as you want, dude. But it's just a cat. You're probably just overtired. I wanted to believe that. But then my phone buzzed. I frowned. A notification from my home security app, motion detected. I clicked the live feed. The cameras showed my living room empty. The kitchen empty. My bedroom. My stomach dropped. Whisper was sitting on my bed, staring directly into the camera, and behind her, in the corner of the room, the shadow. It was taller now, more defined. It wasn't just some formless darkness anymore. It had a body, long arms that stretched toward the floor, fingers that curled in the dim light. Those same sunken, glowing eyes. My hands went ice cold. Jake noticed my face and leaned over. What's wrong? I turned the screen toward him. Holy shit, he whispered. What is that? The shadow twitched. Then, before my eyes, it moved. Not with normal steps, it glided. Straight toward the camera, I gasped and shut the feed. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. My fingers trembled as I turned the screen back on. The room was empty. Whisper was gone. I shot to my feet. I need to get out of that apartment. Jake nodded, his face pale. Yeah, man. I don't know what the hell that was, but you're not going back there alone. I decided to stay at Jake's for the night. He set up a blanket for me on the couch, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying the footage in my head, the way that shadow had moved, the way it had seen me. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyes shut, my mind drifted, and then a whisper. My blood went cold. It was inside the room. My body went rigid. I cracked my eyes open just a fraction. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. Everything was still, but I felt it. Something was here. And then movement. A shape shifting just beyond the couch. Slow, careful, not Jake, something else. I forced myself to stay still, to breathe evenly, like I was asleep. The air was thick, suffocating, and then something touched me. Not skin, not fur, something cold. A weight pressed against my chest, heavy, unyielding. A whisper slithered into my ear, a voice not meant for this world. You cannot run. My body snapped into motion. I jolted upright, gasping for air. The room was empty, but something was wrong. The front door locked, the windows shut. Yet sitting at the foot of the couch, curled in a perfect little ball, was Whisper. Her golden eyes gleamed in the dark. She blinked once, and then, slowly, she smiled. I didn't scream, I wanted to, but the sound died in my throat. Whisper sat at the foot of the couch, her tail curled neatly around her paws, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. The way she smiled, it wasn't natural. Cats didn't smile. Not like that. She tilted her head, the motion slow and deliberate. I swallowed hard. How did you get here? She didn't answer. Of course she wouldn't. Because she was just a cat, right? That's what I kept telling myself, but deep down, I knew. Whisper wasn't just a cat, and she had followed me. Jake stirred from his bedroom, the creak of his mattress breaking the thick silence. The moment the sound reached my ears, Whisper's head snapped toward the hallway, her pupils dilating into black slits. Then, she vanished. 1 second she was there, the next, gone. I shot to my feet, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. My hands were shaking as I backed toward the wall, scanning the dark corners of the room. I didn't hear her move. No soft patting of paws, no swish of a tail, just gone. Jake's bedroom door creaked open. I sucked in a sharp breath. Jake? My voice was barely a whisper. Silence. Then, a low growl. Not from a cat, from something else. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. My stomach twisted, the same cold dread from my apartment wrapped around me, squeezing tight. A shadow stretched across the floor from Jake's bedroom. Long. Wrong. The shape wasn't his. I should have run. I wanted to run. But my legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen, locked in place by fear. Then, Jake screamed. The sound was raw, jagged, full of terror. It cut through the air like a blade, making my blood run ice cold. I snapped out of my paralysis and sprinted toward his room, shoving the door open with a trembling hand. Jake was thrashing on his bed, tangled in his sheets, his face twisted in terror. His arms flailed, pushing at something, but there was nothing there. At least, nothing I could see. Jake! I rushed to his side, grabbing his shoulders. His body was ice cold, drenched in sweat. His lips moved rapidly, whispering something over and over. I leaned in, heart pounding. What are you saying? His eyes shot open. And for a split second, just a split second, they weren't his eyes. They were golden. My breath caught in my throat. Then he gasped, sucking in air like he had been drowning. His body convulsed once before going limp in my arms. Jake, wake up! I shook him, panic clawing up my throat. He blinked rapidly, his breathing ragged. What happened? You were screaming, I said, still gripping his shoulders, like you were being attacked. Jake swallowed hard. His eyes darted around the room, wide and frantic. I saw something. My stomach churned. What did you see? He hesitated. Jake, I pressed, shaking him lightly. What did you see? His voice was barely a whisper. It was her, I stiffened. Whisper? He nodded, his hands gripping the sheet so tightly his knuckles turned white. She was sitting on my chest, just watching me. But her eyes, they weren't right. They were everywhere. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. What do you mean? Jake shuddered. It was like they multiplied. There were dozens of them. Staring at me. And her mouth, his voice broke, his face paling. It wasn't a cat's mouth. It was wrong. And then he stopped, shaking his head violently. No, man, it wasn't a dream. I felt her. She was real. A chill slithered down my spine. This was real. All of it. Whisper had followed me here. And she wasn't just a cat. She was something else, something evil. I forced myself to stand, swallowing back the rising nausea. We need to leave. Jake nodded, still looking dazed. Yeah, okay. We grabbed our things in a rush, barely speaking. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I expected to see her, sitting in the shadows, watching, waiting. But she was nowhere to be found. It didn't matter. She knew where I was, and I had a horrible feeling. No matter where I ran, she would always find me. We didn't stay in Jake's apartment. Something was wrong there now. Tainted, infected by whatever had followed me. Whisper had been there. I didn't know how she had traveled miles in the blink of an eye, but she had. And she had done something to Jake. I could see it in his face. He was pale, his eyes sunken, his movements sluggish. He kept rubbing his arms like he was cold, but the room was warm. And every now and then he would flinch, like he was hearing something I couldn't. I was terrified to ask. Instead, I drove us to a motel on the edge of town, as far from my apartment as possible. I didn't trust my own home anymore. I didn't trust Whisper. Hell, I wasn't even sure I trusted Jake. As I pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot, Jake stared blankly out the window. He hadn't said a word in almost 20 minutes. "We're here," I said, my voice hoarse. Jake blinked like he had just woken from a trance. "Huh?" I swallowed hard. "Come on, let's get inside." We got a room on the second floor. The place smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener, but I didn't care. The door had a lock. There were no dark corners, and most importantly, no whisper. For the first time in days, I almost felt safe. Almost. Jake collapsed onto the bed, rubbing his temples. "My head hurts, man." I sat in the motel chair by the window, my fingers tapping against the armrest. "What happened back there at your place?" Jake hesitated, staring at the ceiling. "It wasn't just a dream," he finally muttered. "It felt real." I clenched my jaw. "Tell me everything." He let out a slow breath. "It started the moment I fell asleep. I was in my bed, but I knew I wasn't really there. The room was wrong. The walls were too dark, and everything felt stretched, distorted, like a nightmare." I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening. "And then," he continued, voice hollow, "I saw her, Whisper, sitting on my chest." A cold chill ran down my spine. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Her eyes were glowing. Not just two. Hundreds. They spread across her body, blinking, staring, watching me from everywhere. And her mouth. He shuddered. It opened too wide, way too wide. There were teeth, rows and rows of them. And then she... He stopped, my stomach twisted. "She what?" Jake swallowed hard. "She crawled into me." I stiffened. "What?" Jake sat up, his eyes dark and sunken. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. She just sank into my skin like she was, melting into me. I felt her inside me, crawling, twisting around my bones, whispering things I didn't understand. His voice cracked. And then I woke up. I stared at him, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. This wasn't just a haunting. Whisper wasn't just a creature. She was something else. And now she was inside Jake. I shot to my feet. "We need help," Jake scoffed bitterly. "From who? A priest? A psychic?" "I don't know," I snapped, raking a hand through my hair. "But this is getting worse. Whisper. She's not normal. She's something evil." Jake didn't argue. He just stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. Then a sound. A soft, familiar sound. A purr. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I turned toward the bathroom door. It was open, just a crack. The light flickered. And then a shadow moved. A low, guttural growl slithered into the room, followed by a whisper. Not a cat's, not a person's. "You cannot run." The room plunged into darkness. Jake screamed. Something yanked me backward. Cold hands, no, paws dug into my shoulders, pulling me into the dark. The whispering grew louder, voices overlapping, twisting into something inhuman. The air turned thick, suffocating. I thrashed against the unseen force, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, Jake's voice, raw with terror. "She's inside me. Oh, God, she's inside me." I reached out blindly, but I couldn't see him. The darkness swallowed us whole, and in the distance, buried beneath the whispers, I heard Whisper, laughing. The darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't see. I couldn't move. My lungs burned as if the air had been sucked from the room. The only thing I could hear was the whispering, countless voices, some hissing, some sobbing, some laughing, screaming. "Get it out! Get it out of me!" I reached blindly in the dark. My fingers brushed against something wet. Not sweat, not blood. Something thicker. A sickening squelch filled the space between us. Then, light. The motel room flickered back into view, but everything was wrong. The walls were shifting, rippling like they were breathing. The bed, the chair, the mirror, all distorted, melting at the edges. Jake was on the floor, his body convulsing. His hands were clawing at his own chest, his face twisted in agony. And Whisper, she sat next to him, calmly licking her paw. She wasn't smiling anymore, but her golden eyes gleamed with something worse. Satisfaction! "Jake!" I lunged toward him, gripping his shoulders. His skin was burning hot, veins bulging unnaturally beneath the surface. His body shuddered, his breathing ragged. Then he stopped. His body went completely still. I held my breath. "Jake?" My voice was barely a whisper. His head snapped up, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought it was him. But it wasn't. His eyes were golden, just like Whisper's. A slow grin spread across his lips. "She's in me now," he whispered. His voice was layered, like more than one person was speaking. "She fits so well." I staggered backward. No, you're lying." Jake, or the thing wearing him, the sound was wrong, too deep, too unnatural. "She likes it in here. It's warm, soft, familiar." I shook my head violently. "You're not Jake. Give him back!" He tilted his head, considering me. Then he lifted a hand, his fingers elongating, stretching into something not human. I could show you, he whispered. You could feel her too. He took a step toward me. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. My fingers searched frantically for something, anything, to defend myself. My hand landed on the motel lamp. Without thinking, I swung. The lamp shattered against his head. Jake, or the thing inside him, let out a guttural screech, stumbling backward. Black liquid seeped from the wound, thick and inky. But he didn't fall. He just laughed, wiping the substance from his face. "Oh, you are fun," he crooned. I didn't wait. I ran. I barely made it out of the motel room before I heard the footsteps behind me. Fast. Too fast. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I sprinted down the stairs, my vision swimming with panic. The night air was cold, but I barely felt it. My only thought was, run, run, run. But then, a figure stepped in front of me. Not Jake. A woman. She was old, ancient almost, for it took me out. Her skin was wrinkled and weathered, her silver hair hanging in thick braids over her shoulders. She wore a deep red cloak, her eyes sharp and knowing. I skidded to a stop, nearly crashing into her. "Help me," I gasped, my voice raw. He's not. I know. She stepped forward, placing a firm hand on my chest. The moment she touched me, a strange calm washed over my body, slowing my racing heart. I turned to look behind me. Jake was standing at the top of the stairs. But he wasn't chasing me anymore. He was frozen, his body twitching violently. His mouth hung open like he was screaming, but no sound came out. The air around him rippled, distorting the space like a heat wave. The woman beside me tightened her grip. "It's not him anymore," she murmured. I turned back to her, desperate. "Then what is it?" She exhaled slowly. "A passenger." I shook my head, dizzy. "A what?" She glanced toward the motel. "It wears him, like a coat. It's been waiting for a body." My stomach twisted. "Whisper, she did this. The woman's gaze darkened. "That's no cat." I swallowed thickly. "Then what is she?" The woman turned her piercing eyes to me. "A door," she said simply, "and you let her in." The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. I had brought Whisper home. I had fed her, sheltered her, and all that time I hadn't adopted a cat. I had invited something else into my life. And now it had Jake. The old woman's grip tightened. "If we don't act now, we'll lose him forever." I clenched my fists, my heart hammering. I had already made one mistake. I wasn't going to make another. "Tell me what to do." She gave me a sharp nod, and behind us, Jake let out a deep, guttural growl. Jake let out a sound, low, guttural, not human. It vibrated through the night air, making my skin crawl. His body twitched violently, his head snapping from side to side like a glitching puppet. The woman beside me, whoever she was, held firm. "There's still time," she murmured, "but you need to be strong. If you waver, if you doubt even for a second, it will win." I swallowed hard. "Tell me what to do." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small black satchel. It looked ancient, the fabric worn and fraying at the edges. She pressed it into my hands. Inside is salt and ash, a mixture that severs the connection between body and passenger. I glanced inside the bag, my hands trembling. A fine, dark powder filled the bottom, smelling faintly of burnt wood and something metallic. The woman stepped forward, eyes locked on Jake, or the thing inside him. "You must force it out, but it won't go willingly." Jake's body convulsed. His mouth stretched open, far too wide, his jaw unhinging with a sickening crack. A black mass shifted beneath his skin, writhing like something alive. Then he laughed. It wasn't Jake's laugh. It was hers. Whisper, or the thing that had worn her form. "You think you can stop this?" The voice rasped, layered with whispers that slithered into my ears like poison. "He's already mine." I clenched the satchel tighter. The woman met my eyes. "Now." I took a deep breath and stepped forward. Jake's body went rigid. His golden eyes flicked to me, unblinking. "You don't want to do this." I ignored the voice. "Not Jake. Not Jake." I reached into the satchel, grabbing a handful of the mixture. The moment I did, the air around me shifted, like the space itself was warping. My vision blurred, the motel lights flickering. Then I threw the mixture directly onto Jake. The reaction was immediate. Jake screamed. His body arched, an unnatural force twisting his limbs. The black mass beneath his skin pushed like it was trying to break free. The moment the salt and ash touched him, the darkness sizzled, curling away from his flesh like smoke burning in reverse. "No!" the voice shrieked. I didn't stop. I grabbed another handful and threw it again, my heart hammering. Jake collapsed to his knees, his body heaving. The black tendrils beneath his skin ripped upward, stretching from his mouth, his eyes, his fingertips, fighting to stay inside him. The woman raised her hands, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The air thickened, pressing against me like a weight. The darkness inside Jake let out a final scream, so piercing, so unearthly, that I clapped my hands over my ears. Then it ripped free. A black, shifting mass burst from Jake's mouth, writhing like a living shadow. It hovered in the air for a split second, dozens of golden eyes blinking within its shape. Then it collapsed inward, spiraling into itself like a dying star. The woman threw another handful of ash at it. The second it touched the writhing entity, it let out a final sickening screech and vanished. Jake's body crumpled. For a long moment, neither of us moved. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, my entire body shaking. Then Jake stirred. My heart nearly stopped. "Jake?" I whispered. His eyes fluttered open, and they were brown, his normal brown. I let out a shuddering breath, collapsing beside him. His body was still burning hot, his skin slick with sweat. But he was himself. It was gone. The woman knelt beside us, checking his pulse. After a moment, she nodded. "He'll be weak, but he's alive." I exhaled, my hands shaking. "What was that?" The woman glanced at the spot where the entity had disappeared, her face grim. "A passenger. It finds hosts, uses them, and when it's done," she paused, meeting my eyes, "it leaves nothing behind." My stomach twisted. "Whisper. She was never a cat, was she?" The woman shook her head. "No, just a shape, a door it could use to get close to you." I felt sick. I had fed that thing. Let it into my home. I looked down at Jake. He was breathing steadily now, his face peaceful. I almost lost him. I almost lost myself. I turned to the woman, my voice raw. "Is it gone for good?" She hesitated. Then she looked at me, her gaze dark and knowing. "For now." The next morning, Jake and I left town. Neither of us spoke about what happened. Some things didn't need words. I never went back to my apartment. I left everything behind, furniture, clothes, even my keys. And Whisper, she was gone. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear something outside my window, a soft purr, a low whisper, and golden eyes watching me from the dark.